Hello, hello, everyone. Today is August 6th. This is one of the SIG Release biweekly meetings. This is a meeting that is recorded and will be available later on the internet. So please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. And in general, just be awesome people. So we don't have a super packed agenda. So we're going to take the opportunity to go over some road mapping items as well as walking the project board. But before we get started, are there any new folks on the call that want to say hi? Okay. All right. And if you are here and you have not had an opportunity to drop your name on the agenda, please do so now. And as Lori mentioned in the chat, if anyone is interested in being the note taker for the meeting, the illustrious honor can be all yours if you just put your name under note taker. Alrighty, so first up, I've been signed out of the Google Doc, of course. But first up, we're going to do some updates on Krell and Inago. And Sasha, you want to take that away?
Yeah. So there's just one pull request left open to finish the push build integration in Inago. And yeah, therefore we can reuse most of the source code from my previous migration from the push build script to the Krell push build command. And after that, we probably can move forward on integrating Krell as API in kubetest 2. And yeah, I'm thinking about some follow-ups, something like making the push build script a self-contained script that we can move everything out of releaselib.sh to have a better possibility to refactor further parts from Inago. Yeah, but all in all, looks pretty good.
So with release lib, how many, tell me about some of the big chunks that are left before we get rid of that.
Yeah, I mean, we still have the whole build process, for example. So everything which is around building the artifacts. But all in all, I think it shouldn't be that much. I can give it a look.
Cool. So this has been some really, really phenomenal work, seeing push build done, seeing the integration work start with the Inago subcommands. So hat tip to everyone in release engineering that's been working on that. It's been really, really awesome to see the VRs fly by. I was staring at the Inago push one. I will finish doing a review later, but it's looking pretty good. And you did testing already for this, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
But not for every release type, so yeah.
Just alpha?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And one thing to mention, we published some MD5 and SHA-1s for all the releases, and there was a switch where we said that we only stick to SHA-256 and 512 for releases from Kubernetes, not 1.18, I think so. And yeah, I did not convert the old logic, and every release we will now cut will only be published with the new SHAs. So.
Yeah, I believe we called the SHA-1s and MD5s deprecated a while ago.
Yeah.
Maybe 116 or so. So yeah, it should be fine to publish without this.
Cool.
Expect though that that will break people. when you start doing that, be watching for the messages on Slack. All of my stuff broke, but we'll just have to remind people that it has been messaged for a while. It went through a deprecation cycle. With a little luck, most people have updated their code. I'm going to guess at the point that they got broken before, they were like, oh crap, we got to fix this for the future, and then subsequently have not, because that's how it goes.
Yeah, I was also thinking about some optimizations regarding how the release artifacts are arranged side by side to the release images and things like that. But if people really rely on those paths, then we probably break them immediately.
Yeah, and I would say also consider the any outputs that would be presented in download Kubernetes. I think there's an open PR for the checksums to be added to the site. But yeah, I would say, like, dependence wise, we had a few breakages. Maybe it was cops or minikube or something that was like fairly large right as we did it. So I think we discovered those earlier. But yeah, let's just make sure that we message that once it's complete. I think once the push build stuff gets wrapped up, we can maybe send a note to the community on that.
Oh yeah.
Go team, great work.
It sounds like they're an action item, but to send out a message, I was waiting for Tim because he was taking notes, but maybe action item to communicate to community. What was the thing we need to communicate to the community? I just want to summarize it here.
The line before that, the MD5 and SHA-1 hashes have been dropped.
Okay. Previous message. All right.
Okay. All right. Next up, we are doing the CI signal draft roadmap. Laura, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Although, I don't. Basically, what I did was I formatted a lot of other people's ideas into a plan. Because we've been going back and forth around whether a sub-project is necessary or not, and then if so, whose domain does it fit most reliably, testing or release? And based on some recent discussions, I tried to untangle some of that spaghetti. So I can share my screen and just go over the highlights, but then I think others with actual practical experience should take over and talk about to-dos. So essentially the question around boundaries, who is responsible for what? We have a long-term goal to get rid of the release team, that this release team doesn't exist and that all of its functions are being handled in SIGs themselves. But it's going to take a while for us to get there, and we want to be mindful of activities that pull responsibility back into our domain. So yesterday, some of us, the leads, were chatting, and an idea for the boundary for SIG release is that we mind blocking and informing jobs for all in-support release branches. But currently, we're on the hook for jobs that owning SIGs don't take care of, and there are historical reasons for that, which I touch upon further below. One of them being that we don't currently have like a stick to incentivize SIGs to actually treat these alerts as they would if they might if, say, the alerts were in the workplace and they were on call. And that's actually the kind of behavior that we would like to see, is that when SIGs get an alert, they would treat it as an on-call page and go and take a look and handle their own alerts. That's not happening right now because of these historical reasons and the lack of that stick. So one question or action item might be that we change the SIG release charter to actually create that stick here. Currently SIG scalability has it, but we do not. once we set our own boundaries, or in tandem rather, we want to prioritize our own boundaries, but then also to do that, creating documentation, it actually clarifies what's involved in CI signal. And then in that frame, we're supporting SIG testing in what seems like their responsibility, which is actually to create a CI signal culture to drive this responsiveness to alerts that we want to see. And so I've listed as 2 acceptance criteria for that would be that, yes, the SIG would treat test grid alerts like pages and their boards would be green. And then SIGs would be responding to those alerts with their own actions, which I guess is redundant. I'll get rid of that. See, simplification. So then we have, yeah, get rid of stuff. So then just like a very quick review of action items to get us farther along, because this is not going to be like, we don't want to look at the whole pile of work, changing a culture, writing docs, all of this stuff at once. Otherwise, it's overwhelming. So the idea here is breaking it down into smaller chunks we actually can achieve. So there's been a lot of talk lately about documenting how to do CI signal for the team members themselves, so the shadows. Then extending that documentation to the broader community. It could be that the community is served by those same docs, but if not, then what are the gaps that SIGs would need to also have at their disposal to be able to handle their own CI signal problems themselves? And this might require some alignment with SIG testing, so I just put that there as an option. And then we have a number of items related to what I noticed is basically there's 2 documentation items and then there's 1 scalability test items that we've been discussing. So what is the order of those items in terms of priority? And do we need to do any of those items to actually unblock our own goal, which right now at the moment is to get us back to here, where we are minding, blocking, and informing jobs for all in support release branches, but starting to step away from doing other SIGs work. And then here is where I have listed deciding whether a sub-project is necessary. Because ideally, we want the work to be done. And we want the work to be done by the boundaries that we've established at the top. Knowing what we do and sticking to that, and consulting and helping other, the SIG testing to help those other SIGs do their part. And then here's the charter change. This number is arbitrary. It might come earlier. It's just how much effort would be required to actually change the charter. That would be what we would have to identify. And then here finally is the culture shift for SIG testing to drive and SIG release being consultants in that effort. So then I've provided a detailed view. There is an issue. So the longest of these items is the documentation part. There are 2 items by Rob and Jorge that deal with this. And what I did last week was break those items down into a list, just here's the items that they've provided for documentation needs. 5 videos. This comes from Rob, and how does CI signal work? And then from Jorge, a list of documentation, like what we would need to have documented in some capacity: test grid, triage, prowl monitoring, prowl status, prowl side pool, GCP prowl dashboards, how end-to-end tests work, and the role of Ginkgo and how we use it. So our goal here would not be to document all of these things exhaustively, but what needs to be documented in order for a CI signal shadow to actually do the job. And then if that's also enough to satisfy what the SIGs need to know, great. But then again, what would be those gaps between what a CI signal shadow would need and then what these SIGs might need? My vote would be to prioritize what this group needs, like what did the shadows need and what does SIG release need to do this, to start driving that knowledge exchange. And then focusing on how to extend that. So then here are some action items related to, here are the 3 GitHub issues on this subject that we should prioritize. So this one, documenting the reason for inclusion of release blocking jobs. From the text and from some notes from different meetings, I've pulled together these action items and questions. So we would need to, these would be action items that are like sub-items of the main GitHub issue. And then these are questions that would influence the direction of that action item. This is another one, add mention of work in progress tests, or release blocking jobs and criteria. There's Rob's in progress work, which he wants to talk about and showed for sure about the automating CI signal status weekly updates in the reports. This is the sub-project action item, which we talked about that already. And then scalability tests for beta releases. It's not clear, to me at least, what we actually need to do. But here are some action item like things. One is working with the working group for Kate Infra. Another is that we have someone who's willing to get involved here. MM4TT looking for some direction on how to help. And then this was maybe an action item. Updating the release charter. I mentioned that already. And then supporting SIG testing as consultants. This has no details because we don't know what that would look like. Say you get all the documentation done, you'll learn things along the way, and then at that time, or as you approach that time, evaluating what would be required from this group to be helpful consultants in that shift. And then just for reference, I put the CI signal role responsibilities items so that we can use this as like a benchmark. This is what is currently expected from the role. So we should think about anything that we do should reflect these items, unless we decide that we wanted to change those items, so that I leave up to you. But basically, here is what the role is responsible for. And so anything that we would do should fit there. Anything that's broader than that, we may want to reconsider. You know, is this actually SIG testing's domain? So I think the main question here is like, what would actually be, I don't know if this group wants to take this on right now, but what I had in mind was like, from these needs, you know, making videos and then test grid, what needs to be documented there, what questions would need to be answered for a brand new CI signal shadow, for example. Triage, again, what would a CI signal shadow need to know to do the job, and all these other things. Like, could we brain dump parts of this process that together would make a happy path toward actually being able to do the job? And we can start skeletal and then build context as we go. But I think a starting point is needed. And that was the intent of the GitHub issue, as far as I can see and understand it.
Yeah, it sounds like to me that, and I'm kind of repeating stuff that Jorge has said, so please feel free to jump in. But it sounds like that, you know, like the two-pronged approach to this is, one of them is documentation that's kind of mostly caters to CI signal team members on SIG release, right? Like, how do you judge the healthiness of these boards, and how do you know, get people to respond to things and that sort of thing? And that's kind of where the videos come in my opinion. And then there's kind of the other side, which is, how do we make these boards healthy more, right? And that is more of just kind of like a consumption aspect of SIG release, right? So I don't think that, and I think this is probably why the sub-project thing went back and forth so much between SIG testing and SIG release, because it's not really like SIG release's job to make sure the boards are healthy. In a sense, like, it is to ensure that before releases happen, and that sort of thing. But in terms of the underlying, you know, quality of the code and that sort of thing, that's kind of just like a bonus when CI Signal jumps in there and works on those things. And typically folks who have been around CI Signal will actually, you know, fix tests and that sort of thing. But ideally, right, like that doesn't have to happen, because the person who implemented the tests are constantly, you know, ready to respond to it. So in regards to how that affects the actual creation of a sub project, it seems like most of the stuff that's related to SIG release are things which fall within like the SIG release lead kind of role on the release team. And the other aspects that the sub project would tackle potentially fall outside of the responsibilities of SIG release, which I think definitely like brings into question whether a CI signal subproject should exist under SIG release. But that's kind of just my 2 cents in interpretation and summation of others as well. So definitely welcome feedback or pushback on that.
Yeah, so the conversation yesterday between the leads actually got interesting, because we were like, wait, do we need this? Because the first one of the things I asked was, when you receive a test grid alert, what do you do? And sometimes the answer is nothing, right? But I think it depends on who you are in kind of the racy chart of test grid alerts, right? And judging jobs on Kubernetes overall, right? So for the most part, for blocking and informing jobs, SIG release is informed and maybe consulted occasionally, but they're not responsible, right? And the way we've kind of built this up is that we are premium cat herders, right? So we spend a lot of time wrangling people, getting a better understanding of how these jobs work. And as you said, Dan, as you get deeper and deeper into CI signal life, you may have the context to effectively fix the job yourself, right? As opposed to putting the right people in the right rooms at the right time to get the job fixed. So the question became like, well, how would you handle this if you were dealing with this at a job, right? And if I was receiving alert at a job and I was on the ops team, SRE team, what have you, my job would be to go fix that alert, right, and dig into it, right? So when we receive these alerts, occasionally I may go like, got it, right? If it's release engineering, right? Or I'm working on this, or I know exactly what this is. I have never seen that anywhere else. Like, so I think, then the conversation kind of led to, well, would it be useful to have a document that said what to do when you get a test grid alert, right? And then when you start talking about that documentation, that feels like not SIG release at all, right? And so we were kind of talking through this, and I was like, this doesn't feel like our thing. For a lot of these components, for me, first and foremost, along that sub-project formation issue, I'm concerned with the blocking and informing jobs, right? What is our fitness to release a new version of Kubernetes, right? And for the most part, like our responsibility, it doesn't end there, because there are things that we have additionally picked up across the years when it comes to responding to these jobs, but like, that should be our concern, right? Are these jobs in a reasonable state to feel good about releasing Kubernetes, right? If they are not, I think the responsibility starts to shift to SIG subprojects, component leads, to discuss those jobs, right? So maybe a good first step is like, what to do when you get a test grid alert, right? And just thinking through that process. It kind of interesting PR we received maybe a week or two ago from someone submitting conformance for SIG architecture, right? I think it was API Snoop or something, and the job was submitted as it was submitted, one, under the SIG release subdirectory, right? And then two, as it was mentioned in the comments that the job should be considered to be blocking, right? And so, so I immediately go like, this is an education thing, right? Because there's a process or set of criteria we expect for jobs that would be blocking for SIG release, right? And then two, there's a question of ownership, because that was a job that is, fits better in SIG architecture and as a conformance sub-project job, that was submitted as a SIG release job, right? So I think there's an opportunity for education overall with like job submission and job maintenance, right? Just because we are listed as one of the informed parties of a job, it doesn't necessarily mean we should be the first party active in bringing that job back to green, right? So, yeah, just brain dumping, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know we need dogs, right? That seems to be quite, like, that seems to be the agreement for now, that we need dogs for anyone, right? So if we start with what we know is needed, then we put off what is maybe not needed, which is the actual subproject itself, and pick up that question after we've done what we know we need.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I'll call myself out here a little bit where I've used like the sub project, not like, you know, stalling as a like good excuse. I mean, I've also been very busy, but like as a good excuse to be like, oh, like I can't really move on this stuff, or maybe even subconsciously doing that, you know. And like we have action items, let's just do them and like not worry about this like organizational thing that may or may not need to happen. So just calling on myself there. I don't know about
Right. Thank you for keeping yourself honest. This is
Absolutely.
a great setting the example.
What I'd add to that is that if you have a project, you know, you have like a large program of work, you have an end goal in sight, and I kind of see that we have a couple of bits and bobs to do to support current CI signal team work. But as I go through this release, I have some out there feedback in terms of taking the word CI out of it, because we have no responsibility for CI. We don't operate CI. So when CI is pulled out from under us, then people have come to me, and actually people from the team that submitted that job, and looked at me sadly going, oh, the CI signal in 119, that was like, And I kind of went, we just report on the flaky tests, you know. So yeah. So the other big shift that I'm trying to make, and then the few bits and bobs that I'm doing for this release, is I want to move away from using the term flaky tests, and I'm increasingly using the term test that produces a non-deterministic result, because it's inflammatory when you tell a test writer that their test is flaky. So you have to be careful there, you know, particularly if the root cause has nothing to do with the test. So, and that's their default position, which is, you know, that's understandable, like, you know.
Adding a quick small comment, just to get back into the feeling of the amazing and beautiful dog that Lori volunteered to put together for us. I think
it's awesome.
I think at the end of the day, the big thing to focus is exactly as Stephen said. If we were in a company and if we actually if everyone here got paid to do Kubernetes, we probably will probably already have created some type of operations SRE team. If somebody had alerts, if test grid actually had alerts, there will be a nice trail of actions, conversations, and more than anything, instead of just you know, working on a feature, pushing the cap forward. There will be a lot more requirements for proper ownership. You know, I don't only have a cap, but I also have some runbook, something that is going to tell you what tests were created, what they're actually testing, and it's going to help. That's going to help us whenever something breaks to figure out exactly how to get right on track. And I think to that end, the big question for this is forget about release SIG testing. Who's gonna do what? Who's gonna do it where? We have a lot of tools that we use. Test Grid Pro. We have the E2E test framework, which is you know, the tools that we use are going to inform how we do the job. And the first things that I could see is imagine that, again, if we were all paid to work on Kubernetes, if we were coming brand new to this, switching from a fancy team to SRE or operations, it would be really nice to have some sort of onboarding that wasn't just, hey, this is broken, please fix it. And to that, and just focusing on solidifying all the tribal knowledge that we have, that we were lucky to gather from the release team and the like. Just solidify all that and kind of be a user group for SIG testing.
Okay, but we have that.
Sorry.
Like, so what it sounds like, if we're gonna use the metaphor like a run book, right? If we have this ops team, like what they need is a run book, and so you've already created the outline for that with these tools, right? That are involved in the process. So
Yes.
videos, grid, triage, prow. What do we put in the run book? What are the steps? That's what we need. It sounds like.
And more than anything, I really want to put the focus on that. If anyone here is interested in this work, or if you're just looking at things, forget about SIG release, forget about SIG testing, and kind of think like, imagine if this was my job.
So that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Just question everything.
That's what I was trying to do right here. Like, if we could brainstorm some of the skeleton here, we could get started right now, but maybe we need to have a separate chat.
So I think a good start for the skeleton is the CI Signal team's handbook, right? So like pulling that out and seeing what works generally, right? So there's a part of the, there's a part of the responsibility at which kind of starts to shift from essentially bubbling up these alerts outwards to looking at how to fix them, right? So pulling out the salient bits of the CI Signal handbook is a really good start.
Right. So I have that here. Like I've also listed whatever documentation I could find that supports these different headings, so that we can just refer to them. We know it exists already. So like with test grid, going to the handbook, seeing what's there, and then maybe taking one of the shadows or some of them and saying like, what is mystifying to you? What do we need to clarify? Or what is missing? And then doing the triage. I mean, if we do all of this at one time, it's going to be huge. So what I would suggest is like breaking apart this list, picking off the first 2 topics that make sense, right? Maybe the most important tools.
Yeah.
And then focusing on that and getting that in good shape before taking on the next items.
So I would say in terms of that, it really does go back to like, what do you do when you get a test grid alert, right? Answer that first, right? We should be able to answer that first, and anyone should be able to answer that question if they own jobs anywhere, right? The second piece would probably be understanding CI, right? Prow is specific to Kubernetes. There are things that are happening in it. There are things that are happening behind the scene that, like, when it works, you don't have to care about it, right? You don't need to know about Tide. You don't need to know about any of the plugins that are attached to a repo. It just does its thing, right? When it's not going well, right? When Bosco's pools are full, or different things are happening, or Tide is stuck because one of the nodes did a thing, right? Like, there are all these random scenarios that you can enter, and maybe those are more advanced scenarios, but I do think that, like, someone who is approaching just the same way they might understand a GitHub action, right, that they've configured for a repo that is non-Kubernetes, they should be able to understand Prow to that level as well.
So it seems like we know what we need, right? So I don't know if we need to discuss that further, unless anybody wants
The only
take us
other
in a
thing
different
that I'd
direction.
like to add is
Okay.
if anybody on the call is interested and not currently working on any of this, please feel free to reach out to Dan, Rob, myself. And other than that, I guess it will also be good to definitely to do this in the open as much as possible, and jump in conversations with SIG testing, because ultimately it's like we want to we have all these just let's call it knowledge. We have all this knowledge, and we want to make sure that it gets out that it gets out into the community, instead of just having one sub team of the release team focusing on all of this. It's like also have SIG storage to have some visibility on this, you know, when people are working on this, so they can see that we published this new thing on documentation, etc.
So what if you took this goal as like document what to do when I get a test grid alert and break that down further into an outline? So you could take this existing doc, or, you know, we can create a section for it here. And then you just, the three of you who are the most knowledgeable, I mean, I don't know if they're, we know for sure Rob, Dan, and Jorge, dump your brains into that and make an outline. And you'll start creating the documentation that way, because you'll be shaping what to do when you get a test grid alert. And then we can pull in more feedback. I mean, that can be open, but if the three of you dump what we have to do, that's a great starting point. That gets us on our way. You're basically creating the documentation that way. That's what we need.
Cool.
So, and I'm here to help you do that. I think right now, if we set ourselves an estimate, and I'm very flexible on that, but like, how big of a job are we talking here? Is this
Just collating stuff, a lot of stuff that's already written down in many cases, so it's not a big job.
cool?
Yeah.
That's great to hear. Easy jobs are the best. So once we have that, maybe we have something by the next meeting. I don't want to create pressure, right? But it sounds like that's actually reasonable.
Yeah, like yeah, until I can click a button to give a CI signal status, I won't be doing anything else.
Do you want to?
And I'm halfway through that.
Nice.
Yeah. Which I can show you now if you want to.
Yes, I was going to
yeah.
say, like, can we seg into that, and you can show us what you've done. So I'll stop
Sorry,
sharing.
before we change the topic, I just want to throw one thing in there. As a CI signal shadow, one of the hardest things to learn so far has just been a lot of the why and the what. So we talk about like master blocking branch in the board and all that, and there's actually no description of what that actually is and why and like who owns it and like who creates that. So as we're doing that documentation, if we can like focus on someone who doesn't know anything as well, like it'll help a lot.
That's our target user here, because we know that the SIGs don't know that either. And for us to be able to onboard people quickly, you know.
Yeah.
So you're an expert, Eddie, because you have the fresh eyes of a newcomer here. So if you're willing to get involved here, that would be extremely valuable, because you're a great editor to tell us, like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
So
or this is missing.
I popped in the chat the release blocking jobs explanation. Take a look at that and let us know if there are things you'd like to see there.
Yeah, I will put that as an example of something to look at.
Awesome. That's stuff we need to get in the handbook. I'll open an issue for that.
Maybe for now we just create the outline, because we know there's going to be a lot of such needs. So I think then we can look at that full list and then decide what issues we actually should make, because maybe there's different ways to look at it. For example, like maybe just who is the owner of this and this and this might be an issue. You know, we'll get to that point.
So I think we can have parallel tracks. Like one right now is fitting the need for a CI signal shadow, right? That like we have identified a need that there's missing information in the handbook. So let's fix that. And we can fix that faster than anything else. And as well as doing all of the broader release plus testing kumbaya work.
Yeah, like I wouldn't go beyond that. I mean, let's focus on the test grid alert resolution.
Could I just add to that actually that in documenting what a CI signal shadow does, to bear in mind that there is a role there, and the role is somebody who is seeking out a flaky test and gathering the evidence to hand it off to somebody who is going to fix it, and really that in terms of that for today, for now, as CI signal team exists, we describe the steps that need to be taken from alert down to report. But really, anyone who has an interest in flaky tests should know how to work through these steps. And the key people who should be interested in this are the test owners and the test writers. And and I think I've said this before, I'd like to see CI signal as consultants walking through the CI playground, taking you to where you need to go to get your tough job done. And we basically set the table for them, but you know, they have to get stuck into the meal themselves. But anyway, analogies, I'm getting sick of them myself. So,
but I think you're saying the same thing we're saying. We're all aligned with like the boundaries question.
But bear in mind, there's a job function here, and anyone should be able to do this job function on the release team and the testers.
Yeah, I think that's our
test writers. Yeah.
I think we're in alignment there for sure, and we have been. So.
Can I show you this? Just so it'll only take 2 minutes.
So yes, but
yeah.
So in terms of action items, we want to do this. What happens when you hit test grid? What happens when you get an alert? It sounds like, Rob, you've got some stuff that you're still working on. So in the meantime, Jorge, can you take making the outline as your action?
Yes.
Awesome. And let's all check in 2 weeks, next SIG release meeting.
And bear in mind, we have outlines already written. Like, I mean, there's outlines for a video playlist, and then there's outlines for reference material for the tools.
They're all in the document. Everything is in one place, so it's all a matter of.
So it's kind of the next step to start filling out the outlines and start filling out what we already have outlined.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is like, how do we handle a test grid alert? That's an outline topic within the doc that's already present there with the rest of those GitHub issues around it as existing outlines. Everything has been outlined that is coming from those GitHub issues. It's all in one place. So we're breaking a part of that to focus on it, because if we look at the whole outline, we don't get anything done. We look at one item, and it's this urgent key question. From that's our skeleton to adding material to answer some of those other questions around the fundamental, how do you deal with a test grid alert? And then I think for me, the key question is, do we parallel effort a CI shadow? How do they know what to do the shadow job? Is that separate from test grid alert job? Or are they the same? Are we talking about one to do or two?
Well, yeah, that's why I'm saying focus on the job to be done. And the job to be done is find a flaky test, report a flaky test, kick off getting that flaky test fixed. So,
right.
So it doesn't matter who you are, but and you can start from you can start from the test grid alert, or you can start from an actual flaky test.
Okay, so but for the purpose of writing documentation, answering our key question about what do we do when we have a test grid alert, covers Eddie, right? Yeah, that's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
Yeah, we want to write this from the context of anyone receiving these alerts.
Exactly.
Not CI signals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Because we want to spread the love.
This is
yeah.
This is very favorable. Just wanted to clear up. We're talking one job.
Yeah,
Great.
no, that's fair. Yeah.
Cool. We can move on to your presentation now, I think.
Yeah, if you
you should have
pick the Robert make the Robert Kilty who once had a jawline. Yeah. I'll just see if I can go to that now. Share screen, and we go desktop 1. Can you see my screen? You can. Okay, 1, 2. That's good. there's nothing earth-shattering here. What I've done is to write a report that at the moment is having a chat with TestGrid, and it's going to the TestGrid summary, which is this here, and it's pulling down the JSON that produces this page, and in the report, I am just, the key things to note here is I'm noting when the data was collected. So out in the future, that may be useful for flake analytics or analytics on flakes down the line. I separate out the job owner. So basically, I pick the first in square brackets tag that that references a SIG, and I pull that out as the job owner. If for a test name that or test step or phase that doesn't have a SIG associated, I just put in a piece of placeholder text to say that the job owner owns this test. So I can produce the CSVs for blocking and informing jobs, and I'm really bad at this. So anyone who is better at this than I would do possibly a better job, but that's just a simple, quick, me going, how do pivot tables work, effort at doing a pivot table on that data. So it's not something I'm very good at. Now, the thing that I want to say about this report is that at present I'm generating CSV. I don't see this as being the final report output. So I'm kind of eating my own dog food here. I don't see this as a final solution. But in terms of notable parts of this report, the two things are that I'm collecting the time at which this was collected. I'm splitting out the owner, and the next step that I'm going to work on for the next few days is to go to the project board and look for issues, do a search for issues logged against specific jobs and specific tests, and put those beside each row in this report. So there's the two benefits that will exist for a CI signal lead will be, one, click a button, get a status update after about a minute. Then the other possible use case in terms of day-to-day ops for a CI signal team is that you can go to a flaky test and refer to a report that says, oh, we already have an issue logged for this. So I have a few ideas of what we can do, and myself, Jorge and Dan have been talking about where this could go. Right now, this is just a Go program that runs in a Go runtime. That's it there. That's the main function for it. Basically, I'm actually in the middle of adding a change to search for logged issues, but I just initialize the class there. I am just supplying the board that I'm interested in. I give it a collected at time, and then I build up a summary URL where I'm going to lift that data, and then there's some reporting fields for logging. I collect the status of the tab group, which is all of the jobs, which that's summary page on TestGrid, and then for each job marked as flaky, I'm collecting flaky tests right now. And then the output is separate out from here. I just walk the data structures that I build up. So I just want to say that I am doing this as a feature branch on my fork of test infra, and I see the only place where I can put this as in test infra is the experiments directory in test infra for stuff that's just experimental and unsupported by test infra. And I may or may not submit this as a PR. With ongoing discussion and usage of this report, we may find that there's things that I'm doing here that really should be done in TestGrid. And if I look at some of the data structures that I'm lifting from, there are unused fields that I'm getting back from TestGrid that has field names that I wish had data, but I'm going off and getting that data because TestGrid isn't giving it to me. And that's because I don't know why that is. I presume that the commonsensical part of this effort has already been thought up and has been thought about by people who are working on TestGrid, and they just don't have the time to do it or whatever, so, or the resources to do it.
So awesome work.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make that assumption.
Oh yeah, yeah. How
I
things appear and how things are not always the same. Yeah, for sure.
right.
Yeah.
Given that this is right now a SIG release tool,
Yeah.
I would put this in K release. We also
Okay.
have a library for some bits of the release engineering work that that maps to test grid. So you may find some useful bits in there, and it's something that you can build on together with the release engineering team. The reason I
Cool.
suggest K release is because we version our repo.
Yeah.
That's one of the big bits. You are going to run into some fun if you landed in experiments.
Yeah.
There are lots of experiments that are not experiments that have existed for years,
Gotcha.
that
Yeah.
are in production use, that have not graduated out. So versioning is a big thing for me, especially if we're going to be using this tool more intently in the future cycles. So I'd land it there, especially like I think you're going to find some bits that we've already written on the release engineering side that you can play around with.
Yeah.
Two, I would imagine that the final state of this is a website where I can click a refresh button.
Well, yes. There's so for runtimes for now, for prototyping and development, it's just a Go program. My thoughts are containerize it, whatever I do next. So I was thinking of using Tim's Golang build sort of setup. I don't know if you know that Tim Hawkins one. Then the two runtimes that I was thinking of doing. Well, see, I could probably cater for multiple runtimes. So although I'm producing CSV now, I might leave that in there as an ad hoc option. I might also leave JSON in as to run ad hoc tools locally. But the other two runtimes I was considering was a PROW instance somewhere. It doesn't have to be the KCI one, could be the CNCF one. And then the other thing was to just go -- server, run up a port, and then
Long running
spit out some
process thing.
HTML with
Yeah.
a nice jQuery sort of sortable, filterable table, you know.
Yeah, I think the win is just multiple output,
Yeah.
right? Getting multiple outputs and leaving it to the user's imagination how they want to consume that.
Absolutely,
I think that's
yeah.
a good first start.
Yeah, and that's the way I've written it to collect data and then output data. So although there's an architectural sort of line there on 272-ish, that could be made into proper components where an outputter or an output formatter is taking that data and then doing the needful kind of thing.
So I would say, yeah, PR this to K release. Let's
Cool.
start
That's
taking
awesome.
a look at. I would say take a look at package testgrid.go.
Yeah.
And see if there's any useful bits in there for
Excellent,
you.
yeah.
So you can start deduping some of that code, and then you'll have a score of reviewers to check it
Cool.
out too.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Yeah.
And then we can take a look at doing a deeper review if you need to in the next release engineering meeting next week.
Yeah, my biggest fear with this was I'd throw it over the wall into test it and they go, "Oh, what fresh hell is this?" So I'm delighted with that suggestion, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I mean, the cool part is if it grows into something that that we decide is no longer really a releasey thing, at least it'll be versioned and it'll be in a state that we can probably
hand it over,
pluck it out of the repo, and yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Then it's a gift instead of something thrown over the fence.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
like, it's like all about spin.
Look at what we made for
catch
you.
This ball.
Exactly.
No, it's a ball. It's not a bomb.
The
It's
holidays
a ball.
coming up.
Yeah, but but to be honest, throwing it over the wall at somebody's it has influenced how I've written it, and because I want to deliver something that's not too intimidating and is reasonably maintainable and that kind of thing. But anyway, any questions? If not, I'll hand back over.
I've got a simple one first. How long does it take to run to collect?
It takes about under a minute.
Cool.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of the things I was thinking of doing was parallelizing it, but I have a rake of maps in here, and I don't think Golang and associative arrays are eminently parallelizable. I don't think.
So there's some
But
code if you dig around the utils package as well in K-Release. So like I think we've collectively all tried to do a bunch of different things on related bits of data, and
Yeah.
have eventually kind of like consolidated a lot of the work within various packages, right? So you may find some useful bits and be able to deduplicate a bunch of code. There's some
Yeah.
parallelization stuff hanging around K-Release that we can dig into.
So I should have timed that, but yeah, it's sub 20 seconds. I could run it again.
Yeah, at that point, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to play with the concurrency toys, but yeah,
yeah, definitely that stuff is definitely fun, good to have in your tool chest. But if it was 20 minutes versus 20 seconds or something, that's sort of
So that's so there's the times there for that run, you know, and it will be a little bit longer because I'm only doing the flaking test there.
Yeah, it's a whole early days pre-optimization thing too.
Yeah.
Like let's make sure we find the fit before we go crazy with the
And then one other question, we're basically out of time, so maybe the answer we could discuss more on Slack, but I'm curious, comparing and contrasting versus the Test Infra folks triage tool, what
the difference is?
I sensed, well, not necessarily the difference, the unique additive, like you've got some specific thing that you're optimizing for, much different than what they've created their sieve for, but maybe we could, it's end of time. We could chat some.
If I could, one last analogy is test grid is the satellite view in Google Maps. Triage is the street level view, and this is a drone halfway between the two zooms.
Miss your analogy now.
Yeah, this is great. This is so helpful. All these.
Yeah, it is kind of like looking at a couple of blocks, whereas triage is looking at a house and who lives in that house, and look at that person's face blurred. I know that guy, you know. And test grid is a satellite view, you know. So they all have their place and their usefulness. Like, I mean, yeah, they all have their place.
Enhance. So with that, we are out of time. Thank you all for hanging out with us this week. If you are on one of our other calls, we will see you then. If not, see you in 2 weeks. Later.
See you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.